Thank you for joining this webinar on navigating the European Deforestation Regulation from SCS Global Services. My name is Iris van Hal, and I am the program manager for the EUDR program at SCS. And you will also get to know two of my colleagues later on during this webinar. But first, I would like to remind you of a couple points. Gustavo, can you please go to the next slide? So here are a couple of things listed for you to remember. First of all, we would like to ask you to use the question function that we have available for you to ask questions or share comments during this webinar. And at the end, we have some time reserved to address these questions for you. Second, we will be recording this webinar. And after the webinar, we will share this recording with you for you to review. And lastly, you will also receive an email from us after the webinar with a link to this recording and any additional resources that we might discuss. So then we can go to the next slide, where I will show you how the webinar is structured. So I will first give you an introduction to SCS Global Services, who we are. And then my colleagues will take over and give you an overview on the timeline of the EUDR regulation. We will give examples on how to achieve successful implementation of the EUDR requirements and also introduce to you the SCS EUDR supporting services that we've developed. And we will close off with a Q&A. And on the bottom of the screen, you can see a little QR code, which will lead you to our contact page. So if you have any questions, inquiries you want to send to us, you can follow this QR code already. And please, Gustavo, we can go to the next slide. So about SCS Global Services. What we do is that we offer a third-party sustainability certification, consulting services and standards development. And we already have issued over 30,000 certificates in 125 countries. We have 40 years of experience doing this. We have over 15,000 clients ranging from the corporate world to governments to NGOs. And we have a very strong global auditor network in every major market. Gustavo, you can go to the next one. Thank you. So this slide shows shows how SCS is structured. We are currently structured into 4 different entities, which are all separate divisions. We have the SCS Global Service headquarters, which offers the certification, verification, and auditing services. We have our SCS Standards department, which develops its own standards. We have our consulting department offering consulting services, and we have the SCS Global Registry, which is a climate mitigation project marketplace. Please, Gustavo, the next slide. This slide shows an overview of the industries that we are working in to advance the environmental, social, and economic sustainability industries globally. And you can see these services industries are very different, ranging from textiles to corporate sustainability, food safety, and sustainable natural resources production. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you an overview of the key services that we offer. I know this is a lot of text, so we'll also offer something for you to review when we will share the recording and the slides. But it does give an overview of the large amount of services that we offer, and also the services related to the commodities impacted by the EUDR that we are offering, including the Rainforest Alliance certification, Fairtrade USA, Responsible Forestry ISCC, and RSPO, Responsible Source Palm Oil. Next slide, please. Here you can see the global presence that SCS has. We have projects, staff, offices all over the world. In other words, SCS can support clients almost everywhere, also with language abilities, local knowledge, local experts. Yeah, we're happy to use the experience that we have all over the world. Next slide, please. So in offering our services, it's very important to us that our customers also have a positive experience. And we ensure this through our dedicated and experienced team. The teams that we have, we also highly value a rapid response time to satisfy our customers and stakeholders. We can also scale up support by helping to quickly expand projects with other products, adding services, expanding to other regions, adding standards, etc. Because we have such a broad service offering, we can also offer bundled services to fill all certification needs. And throughout the years, SCS has also built a strong reputation by showing quality, robustness, accuracy throughout all of the services that we deliver. Next slide, please. So now that you hopefully have a better picture of what SCS stands for and what we can offer, I would like to hand over to my colleagues, also on the EUDR team, Gustavo, who's the Director of Business Development, and Mohammed, the Technical Director. They will tell you more about EUDR, the timeline, and the services that SCS has developed to support.
Well, EUDR, I think it's the flavor of the season. Everybody's talking about it. Probably you have been hearing about it the entire year. I'm sure you know a whole lot about the topic, so we will just dive in directly. I am Mohammed Abdurazik, a Technical Director at SCS Global Services. The EUDR, or the EU Deforestation Free Products Regulation, aims to combat global deforestation. It's a part of the EU's Green Deal. If you're in the US, you have a similar deal, different regulations, of course. Soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, rubber are included or covered under the EUDR, in addition to certain derived products. I think they are short of 200 products or derived products. The requirements are simple. The commodities and the products are deforestation free and legally produced according to the country of origin. The geo-coordinates of all production plots are collected and accompanying each consignment or shipment. And then operators in Europe, they have to perform due diligence and submit due diligence statement via or DDS, via DDS information system. Of course, these are simple, just apply them is not that simple. Applicability is operators and traders in Europe who deals with or which deals with the commodities or the derived products. Deadline, it's essentially the end of this year, the December 30th, for all the operators, traders, with one exception until the end, the middle of next year, which is a subset of the SMEs, which is basically the micro and small enterprises. Those guys, and they have to be established before December 31st, 2020. Then they will have an extended deadline. Next slide, please. The key aspects, again, deforestation free and legality criteria. If you are talking about palm, it's a deforestation. If you are talking about rubber and so on, it's also kind of deforestation. However, if you are talking about wood, timber, then it's not deforestation. In this case, they call it forest degradation. And legality, we will show later what does it mean exactly for the legality. It has to be legal according to 8 major categories of criteria based on the country of origin. And then you have due diligence. All companies, they have their own due diligence. But when you are talking about this specific due diligence, means the certain economic players in Europe, they have to create a specific due diligence system and then submit and then create out of that system a statement before the shipment arrive to Europe or the commodities are being placed into the European market in case they are produced within Europe. Next slide, please. The deadline, the EUDR, is in effect today. So it started on June 29th, 2023, last year. At the end of this year, all operators and traders must comply with it, the European ones. And there is a kind of an exception for the micro and small enterprises to extend until the middle of next year. Provided two conditions again, that they were established before December 31st, 2020, and they were not subject to the EU timber regulation, which is preceding the EU EUDR. Next slide, please. Commodities: soy, beef, palm oil, wood, cocoa, coffee, and rubber. The regulation has basically mostly something called harmonized system, which is HS codes. The HS codes are 2, 4, or 6 digits. And then there is something specific that you can derive out of these called are basically the custom codes within the EU. We call them CN codes. The first two digits are essentially the chapter. So if you have 180806, it means that the 18 is chapter 18 of the custom codes. The second, I mean, the 4 digits means the subheading or the heading. 6 digits means subheading, and CN is 8 digits. The CN is the one that you need when you are placing the products into the European market. So when you are exporting something or importing something out of the EU, whatever the commodity is, you have to have this CN code. You can also have subcodes in certain cases, but for this purpose, 8 codes are enough. In the EUDR Annex 1, you will find basically, sometimes you will find HS code of 2 digits, 4 digits, and 6 digits. You will not find any CN subheading. Key definitions on the next slide. The EUDR, they really put a lot of effort into defining stuff. It doesn't mean that everything is 100% clear. There are some clarifications to come. But deforestation is simple. It's the conversion of forest to agricultural use, whether human induced or not. Agricultural use here means if somebody deforested an area and created a resort, that is not a deforestation under EUDR. If it's for infrastructure, the same. It has to be converted into agricultural use. And as I said, according to the, if you are working in the timber industry, then there is no deforestation, it's rather forest degradation, which is the conversion of certain types of forests into other types of forest or woodland lands. For instance, if in Romania you have the something they call it virgin and semi-virgin forests, these are basically primary forests. You cannot convert them into plantation. That will be considered as degradation. Due diligence system, it's a system for operators to ensure, operators and traders, to ensure compliance with preventing deforestation and forest degradation, and compliance with the legality of the country of origin, which this system has to be made by the operators in Europe. Operators and traders, these two terms are more technical terms because they can, the same entity can play a trader in one transaction or one in a supply chains, and in another one they can be operator. Operators are the first entity that places the product in the market. If they are importing the product, the importer is an operator. If it's a company that is harvesting wood and then put it for sale, then they are an operator. If a chain, they have their own plantations, and then they have, for example, soy within Europe, and they even have their own supermarket, let's assume, then the supermarket will be the first operator. The traders, they don't produce stuff, they just make them available. But the first entity that places the material, the commodity, or the derived product into the EU, or exported from the EU, is an operator. Geolocation means basically you have to collect the geographic coordinates. Everybody knows you have your Google map, or and then you want to go somewhere. Okay, these are the coordinates X, Y, or longitude and latitude. Risk assessment. There are two kinds of risk assessment within the EUDR. One of them is for the operator to check. I would like to get that there is no negligible or no risk at all for the consignment that I am placing into the EU, exporting from the EU. If placing means you put it in the market if you are from the EU, or importing it. So I would like to know that there is no risk or there is a negligible risk. If the risk is non-negligible, there is another way. There is also a definition of the benchmarking, which will be done by the EU, which is essentially risk classification for an entire country. They will say Indonesia is this level, which is low, standard, or high. All countries are standard at first. The change to be high or low has to be done by the European Commission. SMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. This is basically defined by the business scale, as we'll see later on. The legality on the next slide. Legal harvest means 8 categories. If you are familiar with the EUDR, some of them were already included, but under those, there have been also some changes. Land use rights, environmental protection, forest management, third-party rights, labor rights, human rights, anti-corruption, tax and trade regulations. People working in the world of wood, probably this is relatively easy for them because they have been doing it for a long time. In other sectors, this is not as straightforward. There should be kind of guidance coming issued by the EU, hopefully this month, but it's also possible to be issued next month on what exactly should be checked, the criteria for the legality under each of these categories. Our auditors have been already doing this kind of legality check for years, since the EUDR and TR and before that. So this is nothing new. It's new to be expanded into from a huge forest management unit into smallholders in Indonesia or cocoa farmers in other countries. Then it gets much more complicated. Deforestation on the next slide means basically the conversion of forest to agricultural use. What is a forest? The EUDR took the definition of the FAO, which is a piece of land that has trees. These trees are higher than 5 meters. They occupy more than 10% of the land. That would be considered as a forest that you cannot cut. If you convert that into agricultural use, whether human induced or not, and this is also an important part, assuming there's a fire in Indonesia or in Brazil, or even in Europe or in Canada, the area that was burned cannot be converted later on to agricultural use. That's including also, I mean, not only limited to fires, but whatever the mean, human induced or not, the cutoff is the end of 2020. Cannot be converted after that. On the next slide, it's a small repetition on the forest degradation. If you convert a primary, they have different definitions: primary forest, naturally regenerating forest, plantation forest, planted forest, and then other wooded lands. Primary forest means there's really nothing, no significant human impact happening in the area. Naturally regenerating forest means it was forest before and then regenerated by itself. Then you have planted forest, which means that somebody put already the trees in the area. Plantation forest requires more management into it. And then you have areas that are below 10%, but has, for example, from 5 to 10%, or has more shrubs. Then in this case, it will be wooded lands. So the conversion of primary forest to a planted forest or plantation forests or other wooded lands is not allowed, for instance. There are some exceptions, of course, in the definition. For instance, primary forest into other wooded lands. Into not other wooded lands, into naturally regenerating forests. But how is that in practice could be applied? That's a different topic. Then we go back to definitions on the next slide, which is what's an operator? I already mentioned that, but it gets confusing. So we are trying to repeat some of the topics that you are already familiar with, probably, just to make it more clear. The operator is any natural or legal person who places relevant products on the market, means importing them, or they are produced within the EU and they are being placed in the market for the first time, or exports them as a part of a commercial activity. Example, the first one, of course, is an importer. An importer is an operator. Somebody, a company importing cocoa butter, for example, they are an operator under the EUDR. A manufacturer is also an operator if they are taking one commodity and then they are changing the commodity. For example, they have a code of 123, the CN code that we mentioned, and then they took it into their factory. They made some changes to it, and it got to a different code within the EUDR. I think we have some technical issues there. Then they are also considered to be a manufacturer. On the next slide, we have the definition of a trader. They are entities in the supply chains that they don't really manufacture or produce the products themselves, but they make them available. So they buy from somebody and then they sell to another person. For example, supermarket chain or retailers. And they have a role, of course, in commercializing the product. Each of those two entities, the operator, the first person that puts the product into the European market, even is within the European market. An operator can, a trader can buy the stuff from one operator, sell it to another operator. The operator creates a new CN code for their own products. Then we have two operators, and between them is a trader. On the next slide, we'll see this is an example that is hypothesized, let's say, by the GIZ in Germany, where it's very straightforward and very simple supply chains, extremely simplified, where we have a rubber plantation. They tap the latex to get it out, transport it. So at the level until tapping, the producers, and here the producing is a very specific term. It doesn't mean that you are producing it in a factory. It actually means that you are harvesting it or raising the cattle, for example. So these are the producers. They have to provide their coordinates. They have to make sure that they are deforestation free after the cutoff of the 30th of December 2020, and that their production, in this case rubber, is legal. Gets transported, goes to processing. It can be processed in different ways and then gets transported again. This needs a chain of custody. So until as of today, there is no requirement on the legality for the intermediaries. Who knows, it might change, but at the moment it is like that. Once it goes into the borders of the EU, then here we have an operator. And then that operator will take the material. They have to create the due diligence statement. They have to create also the due diligence itself, as we will see it in the next slide, and then sell it down the supply chains. So what is the due diligence requirement? An operator or kind of non-SME trader, they have to collect the data, they have to conduct risk assessment, and they have to, if the risk is not non-negligible or not negligible, then they have to go for risk mitigation measures. Risk mitigation measures, for instance, like you send an auditor to the region, you get certified, You do your own internal auditing of the process. Whatever the thing is, if the risk is there, there has to be some mitigation measures. On the next slide, we have the data that to be collected. Commodity type, for instance, the CN code, the quantity, the country of origin, the date of production. Date of production here means the harvesting date. If it's wood, usually you don't cut all of it at once. You can have it as a range. And in case if you are dealing with livestock, then it will be the raising period, basically. Then you need the exact coordinates of all the plots where the commodity was grown or harvested. And then you also need the details of the suppliers and the supply chains. That's the legal name, the address, contact information. And the operators, they have to also to prove the legality for example, land titles, licenses, certification, and other relevant commodities. There is a difference between large operators and small operators, large traders and small traders, and whether they are the first entity or they are still downstream. On the next slide, we have the definitions of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. The micro enterprises means they have less than 10 employees and an annual turnover or balance sheet, one of them, of a total not exceeding 2 million euros. Small is 50, 10 million euros. Medium, 250, and then the turnover is not exceeding 50 millions, or the balance sheet total is not exceeding 43 million. There is an entire document from the EU on how to define the small, the micro, small, medium-sized enterprises. Of course, some of you are not in Europe, so they are not into that. It doesn't matter what is the size. If you are exporting your wood or your rubber or palm oil or whatever from Indonesia, Malaysia, whatever the country is, then you have nothing to do with that. Your client in Europe is the one who will have to check whether they are micro, small, medium-sized enterprises and others. On the next slide, we have an example of an EU company sourcing palm oil. We have the plantation, and then we have the processing of the FFBs, the fresh fruit bunches, and then it should be segregated from everything else at the processing level, and then later on also segregated during the transport, and then it arrives into an operator in the EU. Of course, this is extremely simplified. If you have a smallholder somewhere in Indonesia, then they have, I don't know, the first person that they sell to through WhatsApp, they have the tuk-tuk to transport some of their FFBs, and then it goes to another transporter, and then a third transporter, and then it goes to the oil mill. It's a long process. Here it is extremely simplified. If the material is coming from an area that is deforested or not legal, it should not go to the next step. If it's not segregated into the next step, it also cannot be included or sent into the EU according to the EUDR. Even if you mix the material from EUDR checked material with another EUDR checked material, bulking basically, you have to combine the geo-coordinates from both shipments or both deliveries, let's say. So this is quite strict and very difficult in practice. It's not that easy. And then here, the operator in Europe, they will have to do their due diligence, DD, due diligence obligations. They have to submit the statement. They have to receive, probably as an operator, they also can receive a due diligence statement from another auditor, and then put the reference number out of that document. On the next slide, we have another example for a domestic EU timber exported as furniture. So we have here the sawmill. The operator in this case is just the company that is harvesting them. At that time, they become the operator because they put their product in the market. Some other entity can sell them. And then we have an SME downstream operator, because the first one was the operator. The second one could be SME or non-SME operator. The downstream SME operators, they don't have to do due diligence, the whole thing. They just have to receive the due diligence statement, the reference number from the person before them. And then if they sell it to a SME trader, also small trader, They also don't have to do due diligence obligation. They just take the number from the first operator, delivered to them by the second, by the SME downstream operator. If they sold it at the end to a large downstream operator or through a large downstream trader, both of them would be basically the same, then they have to check the due diligence again. They don't have to conduct the entire thing, but they have to check that the process that was done by the first operator is correct. And then they have to submit the due diligence statement based on the previous number, including also what have they done to make sure that the process of the first operator was correct. I think we have mentioned probably due diligence 1,000 times, so now comes even more. On the next slide, we have the due diligence statement, DDS, information system. For the next 5 years, the due diligence system will look like that, the graph that you see on the right side, where the competent authorities, the member states' competent authorities, the economic operators, they call them economic operators, but that actually includes operators and traders and something called authorized representative. And then from the other side, you also have the European Commission and the member states' custom authorities. So the products that's being imported will not be released to the market without conducting the due diligence in full. Within the system, we have 3 different entities. Let's say we have the operator, which we know. The operators, they can create a due diligence. They can import, export, or use something for the domestic production. The traders can also create a due diligence system, and in this case, they just trade within the EU because they cannot be the first party. The very first party, whether exporting or importing, is not called a trader. It's called an operator. Even if their job is not to produce anything, it's just to receive the material that they bought, they will be still called operator. Trader means that there's somebody else placed it for the first time, and they are just selling it for the second time. And then these 2 entities, the operators and the traders, can have an authorized representative. They can authorize a company or a person to create the due diligence statement on their behalf, where basically they can represent an operator, import, export, or domestic production, or they can be representing a trader, which is basically trading within the EU. The system is, well, it's not very user-friendly. You can see it on the next slide, where you can basically choose between an operator, an organic control body, authority, appointed veterinary office or so. If you choose an operator, for instance, on the next slide, you'll see how to register. Of course, this is still only for the European entities. They have to enter some information about them, and then they have to get a kind of a permission from the EU. And once everything is there, they have the permission, then on the next slide, they can already submit the geo-coordinates. They have to submit the due diligence statement, and they have to submit the geo-coordinates. The geo-coordinates are, if it's less than, I mean, for each plot of land, if it's less than 4 hectares, it can be a point in the middle. If it's more than 4 hectares, it has to be the entire polygon. You put both of them together into something called a GeoJSON, which is a format, a specific geospatial format. And then you can upload it to that system. At the moment, it has a limitation of 25 megabytes, but there is a huge push to the EU to make it a bit higher. I mean, if the EU really wants to have such a very ambitious regulation implemented, they should also be equally working hard on their side. Okay, on the next slide, you already submitted the due diligence statement. What happens in the background? The background is the first thing is there is an internal risk assessment based on the country, the region of production, the product quantity versus the land, for example. So something is quite simple. Geolocation check is in the sea, in the lake, in the forest. That part here needs really quite an input and work from the operator to make sure that even if the EU has maps that are not very accurate, which is going to be the case in many due diligence statements, you have prepared yourself in a way that is telling them, well, I did my job very well, and this is proving that all these geolocations have been checked for deforestation and of course for legality as well. And then you get the data range. If the competent authorities started to put geographical areas into suspicion, which is going to be extremely difficult. I mean, most of the competent authorities have worked with wood, but they have not worked with the other commodities, at least not to a high level, let's say. So there will be, this is going to be not very easy on their side. Hopefully also the bureaucracy is not going to get the best out of the process. And then we have here, if the competent authorities or customs, they flagged an economic operator. As I said, economic operator is just the word that they mentioned for operators or traders. Both of them are called economic operators. Then this is going to be taken into account. Let's assume everything went well. You have to keep the documents for 5 years, which means also your suppliers have to keep their documents for 5 years just in case. And then you submit at the end of the year kind of a general report. You have also, if the operators and the non-SME traders, they have to report it or publish online, basically, their system and what have they found and so on. It's a full process that is of course here is not a place, but we have created a kind of self-paced training that will be published soon with a lot of details on how to do that if you are an operator, if you are a trader, if you are an organization, if you are a farmer, an owner, exporter, doesn't matter, you will be able to get more details on that topic. In the off chance that there's some problems found and that the company has not done their job well, the competent authorities have really quite strong how can I say, tools in their hands. On the next slide, the main penalties, it can be fines, which could be up to 4% of the operator or the trader's total annual EU-wide turnover for the preceding financial year, which is significant, not only within the country that the competent authority is in, it's rather for the whole EU. The material could be taken, confiscated, the operators or traders could be temporarily excluded from public procurement, and there could be also due diligence restrictions. If you are importing from a country within EU or outside, I mean placing from the EU or importing from outside of a country that in the future is classified by the European Commission as low risk, there's something called simplified due diligence, which is just you collect the information. You don't do the risk assessment, you don't do the risk mitigation. But this could be taken away as a kind of a penalty. I hope this was not too much, but we'll be happy to answer any questions. And now I hand over to my colleague Gustavo to give an overview of the services that we are providing at SES. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muhammad, for this brilliant presentation. Very proud to see and to be able to share this knowledge with our participants today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Gustavo Bacchi, and I will talk about our EUDR support services. So in this slide, we can see going straight to the point, what we developed to support our customers in order to comply with EUDR requirements. Starting with consulting services, I will go through to the details in the coming slides, but this is one option that we developed to help our customers. On the assessment, we developed two options, the compliance assessments and the due diligence integrity assessments. Both will also be explained in detail in the next slides. And the fourth option is the self-paced trainings, online trainings that are provided by our SES Learning Hub. So from where comes the knowledge and the experience that we develop or to support the development of our SES EUDR support services. It's very simple, comes from the ground. So comes from applying, verifying, auditing different standards in different supply chains, covering all relevant EUDR commodities. And many of you are also familiar with the fact that many standards shown in this slide and others that are not listed in this slide contains similar requirements. In that sense, we see a huge overlap with what we are doing for many, many years and the new EUDR requirements. So this is the basis from the or the background knowledge that we are putting into the market through our SES EUDR services. So starting with consulting services, it's there are many possibilities within this option. So and we know that each company requires a unique approach, a unique understanding in order to achieve the EUDR compliance. It depends on each company sourcing and trading activities of relevant commodities entering or leaving the EU market. And as I mentioned before, our deep expertise in different supply chains of each of the 7 commodities will help companies to make sense of the law within the context of their business operations. SES EUDR Consulting provides several services that can be applied by companies depending on their specific needs. Being more specific, still within the consulting services for the EUDR compliance, we can help companies to develop a due diligence system from the ground, from scratch, supporting, refining or existing systems or procedures already implemented in-house to be fit for purpose for meeting the EUDR compliance. In relation to risk assessment and mitigation measures, SES also has a strong knowledge in risk assessment services that we want to provide to our customers to understand the relative likelihood and severity of the EUDR non-compliance. And this would be aiming to identify and to prioritize actions and measures that needs to be taken towards additional information in data collection through the whole supply base, and eventually audit the possible mitigation measures. Within the compliance support, SES works with companies to develop supplier codes of conduct, policies, due diligence, risk assessment procedures, traceability system refinement or adjustments, and supplier training and engagement to support EUDR compliance. And on risk mitigation, we can also develop and help companies to develop and implement risk mitigation strategies for products and value chains that demand complex traceability solutions or are at a higher risk of non-compliance. So, all in a nutshell, we developed various options within the EUDR consulting services. And here we have in this slide some highlight activities, starting with corporate regulatory and implementation advisory, needs assessment and strategy development, due diligence system development and review, gap and risk assessment, commodity and value chain traceability, and customized verification checklists. And this is only to provide some examples. On the compliance assessment, I would like to start with this option, which is aiming to support companies or operators outside the EU borders. So basically targeting farmers to exporters. This is the focus of these services, and SCS can help with process by checking EUDR compliance with various aspects in the supply chain against its checklist to identify potential gaps. So in this simplified supply chain, you can see on the left side of the flow, compliance assessment is basically aiming to support companies prior to the export to EU, but not limited to that. On the examples of operations, so we are talking about processing facilities, importers and exporters that must comply with collecting information on their supply chains and submitting due diligence statements with applications for the custom clearance. Once it's defined and determined if they are from low or high risk countries, the process might differ, with low risk operators being allowed to conduct simplified due diligence. Just to share an example on how specific a compliance assessment can be depending on the situation. The next possibility that we developed is the due diligence integrity assessment. And this solution was developed focusing on the operators located within the EU borders. So manufacturers, importers, exporters that must report, implement and report on due diligence systems, as explained very well by my colleague Mohammad, in their supply chains to avoid sourcing commodities and their derived products that are not deforestation free or have not been produced based on the origin country's policies and regulations. So basically the due diligence integrity assessments is aimed at EU operators, as I mentioned before, but not limited to that. We know that multinational companies, they also have operations in the origin countries, and then which means in practice that the due diligence integrity assessment could also cover activities that are taking place outside the EU countries. So summarizing the due diligence integrity assessment, as I said, developed for companies that already have established solutions for EUDR compliance for all relevant commodities. It also caters to those preparing for audits by competent authorities. And SCS, in that sense, performs a comparison of their internal due diligence statements, past and current, against its own checklist. And finally, detailed report on the integrity of the due diligence process and internal procedures, risk assessment, as well as risk mitigation measures. The option on trainings is also in the final stage of preparation. Very soon we will communicate and announce how companies can engage and access our online self-paced courses, and they will be specific for each commodity and impacted industries. So this is basically what I prepared in relation to SES EUDR support services. And before starting our question and answers session, I would love to hear your answer about the question that I will launch now in the poll. So please pay attention into your screen, because the question will pop up asking if given all the information EUDR and SES services covered today during this webinar, have you identified your organization's EUDR needs? I would love to have your feedback on this question before we start our questions and answers session. So one more minute to see if everyone had time to think, reflect a little bit on the content that we shared today, and provide the feedback through the poll. We have already, yeah, it looks like we have 55% of the participants voted. I would love to reach at least 70%. Please give us your feedback, and then this will help us also to improve future webinars and content. Yeah, we are almost there. 63% voted. So in order to move ahead with the next session, because time is flying, I will hand over now again to my colleague Iris, and she will conduct the next session. Thank you very much for your participation and providing your feedback.
And with that, I think we have to wrap up. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, for participating in the poll, for your questions. On this last slide, you can see the contact information from Gustavo and Mohammed. Again, the QR code if you want to contact us, and a link to our webpage where we have all the EUDR services listed, so you can look at this again when you have time, see the services that we have developed. And as mentioned before, we will also share with you the slide deck and the recording of this webinar in case you want to review anything. Thank you very much. Also, Gustavo and Mohammed and the technical team of SES behind the screens. Yeah, we hope this was useful, and see you next time.